me exactly, but, you know, somebody like me. I'm a citizen of York County. I'm a citizen of this country. And we've always been involved in the courthouse here. Our lives have always revolved around what happened here. There were tragedies and verdicts and, there goes my hat. And, there's tragedies and verdicts and adoptions and anything you can think of happened here because it was important. Right here in a courthouse, just like this in York County. You know, even the most important thing that ever happened here was a birth of this nation. It was the birth of the United States of America, right here. You see that back there on the wall? That's the Declaration of Independence. Yeah, you've all read that, and you think you know it. But have you really read it? Have you really known what it says? I'll tell you what it doesn't say. It doesn't say that the Declaration of Independence created the United States of America. It doesn't say that at all. It never intended to. Now, what it said was pretty important. That the original 13 colonies declared themselves, or the Congress declared in Philadelphia in 1776, that the original 13 colonies were free and independent of the king and the British government. You know, we used to be the subject of King George, right here in York County. From this courtroom, British law was imposed. You know, there were pillory posts right outside. And you know, they had some pretty tough laws. They would cut off a fellow's ears and nail them to a post if he was a counterfeit. Well, we don't cut off fellows' ears anymore. And they had an old jail. They used to throw people into jail because they didn't pay their debts. Well, we don't do that anymore. But we still have an old jail. No, we got a new jail, didn't we? But the point is that we in York County, after the Declaration of Independence became free and independent, Pennsylvania colonists, not United States citizens. I know that. You know how I know that? Because right away, they appointed a committee to write an agreement so that the 13 colonies would work together and help each other out and stay united. You know, old Ben Franklin was right. You know, he looked down through his bifocals, which he invented. You know that? I think it was right after he invented lightning. Was that it? No, maybe he didn't do that. And he said, you know, if we don't hang together, King George, he's going to hang it separately. And he would have too. So the Congress agreed to appoint our own John Dickinson in charge of writing an agreement. And he did. But, you know, then Congress argued and debated and compromised. Oh, man, I'm too old for this job. 200 years is a long time. Anyway, they debated and they argued and they finally agreed. And they did it here in Yorktown back in 77. It was 1777. That is. Hancock from Massachusetts. He was the first president of the Congress that met here. But he was feeling kind of poorly, and he had to resign almost right away.
Brady last completed 2 years and 5 months since you did me the honor of electing me to fill this chair. I think I shall be forgiven if I say that I have spared no means to be spent for liberty, to gratify your wishes, and to accomplish the view of Congress. My health being very much impaired, I find some relaxation absolutely necessary. I must therefore request for indulgence for a leave of absence of 2 months. May every happiness, gentlemen, attend you both as members of this House and as individuals. May I pray that the unanimity and perseverance may go hand in hand in this House, and that everything which may tend to distract you or divide your counsels be forever banished.
Hancock's prayer will come in very handy because there was plenty to divide the Congress. But on at least one matter, the members immediately agreed, and that was to unanimously appoint Hancock's successor. It was Henry Lawrence, delegate from South Carolina. He was a giant in his day, a real patriot. His son was on staff at Valley Forge. Later, Lawrence would be captured by the British and thrown into the Tower of London. But on November 1st, 1777, he assumed leadership of the Congress in our York County Courthouse.
Gentlemen, I don't think I really want the responsibility of being president. But I hear that the winters are rather cold in Yorktown, and since the president has the privilege of sitting by the fire, I'll take the job. Now, shall we get on to the business at hand? You all have in front of you copies of the first draft of the Articles of Confederation. The Secretary will refresh our recollection on the motion we were debating when we were interrupted in Philadelphia, relative to that section of Article 5 dealing with representative voting. Mr. Thompson, if you please.
The motion before the Congress now reads: in determining questions in the United States in Congress assembled, each state shall have one vote.
The chair recognizes the delegate from Maryland, Mr. Samuel Chase.
Mr. President, I am constrained to observe that this article is the one which is most likely to divide us, and thus must be given careful, if not prayerful, consideration. On the one hand, we have already heard reports that the larger colonies have threatened not to confederate at all if their weight in this Congress is not proportionate to the numbers of their people. On the other hand, the smaller states have let it be known that they will declare against any union if they do not have an equal voice with the larger states, if that's for the protection of their rights. It is clear that it is the utmost importance to bring all parties together on common ground. For if we sever and remain separate from each other, no foreign power will ally with our common cause. Or different states will form different confederations and allies with others. There will be scenes of civil war and bloodshed. Such a separation and independence will surely make us all a miserable people. It is clear that it is the utmost important to bring all parties together on a common ground. For if we sever and remain separate from each other, we will never stand as our own country. The importance of our common cause, our personal and private interests, the very goals of victory and peace, all these things require that we should confederate. All these things dictate that sacrifices must be made in order to compromise on this difficult question. I submit to you that there is a way to compromise. The issue need not be decided one way or the other. Let us simply classify the questions that come before this body and permit a different means of voting for each. For example, in all questions concerning life or liberty, the smaller states will have an equal voice with the larger. But in matters concerning money and property, let the voice of each colony be proportionate to the number of its inhabitants.
The chair recognizes Dr. Witherspoon.
Mr. President, I believe all men agree that a confederacy is necessary. Should this idea get abroad that there is likely to be no union among us, it will surely dampen the passion and enthusiasm of our people. It will diminish the glory of our struggle, and it will open to our view future prospects of disagreements and war amongst ourselves. But I must align myself with those demanding equality of voting among the colonies in Congress. If equal voting be refused, the smaller states will become vassals or subjects of the larger. All experience shows that vassals and subjects of free states are the most enslaved. I need only note the history of the Helots of Sparta or the provinces of Rome. There is also a danger of foreign powers noting this internal inequality. This blemish in our union could be used by those foreign powers to try and disengage the smaller states from so unequal a confederacy. Gentlemen, we are gathered here as representatives of separate colonies, not as individuals within those colonies. Thus, the principle of equality in representation, an excellent principle, can and should apply. It must apply colony to colony, not on the basis of the number of individuals within the colonies. Application of this principle has basis in experience. In fact, the East India Company voted by the person and not by the proportion of stock owned by each. The Belgian Confederacy voted by provinces, not by the number of individuals within those provinces. Gentlemen, I can only add my prayer that in the enlightened state of mind we may anticipate a lasting confederacy, one founded on fair principles.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Witherspoon, for those wise observations. Yes, Mr. John Adams from Massachusetts Bay.
Fellow delegates, I take issue with my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Witherspoon. True, we are delegates from individual states or colonies, but states and colonies are made up of people. We represent the people. Therefore, that dictates that our voting should be proportioned to the number of people that we represent. It has been stated that we are individual colonies, making a bargain together. But the question is not, what are we now? The question is, what ought we be when our bargains have been made? The proposed confederacy is to make us one, is to form us into one common mass. We shall no longer retain our individuality, but become one. to which all questions are submitted to the Confederacy. It has been objected that a proportionate vote based on population will endanger the smaller states. We answer that an equal vote will actually endanger the larger states. Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts are the three greater colonies. Consider their distance from each other, their difference of produce, their difference of interests, their difference of manner. It is apparent they can never have an interest or inclination or combine for the oppression of the small. But it is also reasonable to suppose that the smaller colonies will naturally divide on all questions with the larger. So the danger of inequality lies not with the possible combination of the larger against the small, but indeed just the reverse, the smaller with the larger. And now, with permission of the chair, I yield the floor to Mr. Daniel Rodell, our colleague from Pennsylvania.
Agreed.
Gentlemen, I lend my poor voice, all of you. I am very concerned as to where we are going from here. I look at this important issue and I say to myself, I'm not capable of telling you all my thoughts precisely. I do not have the wit and the wisdom of my neighbor, Dr. Franklin, nor the logic and the clarity of the esteemed barrister, James Wilson, Esquire. Some of you were in Philadelphia, not all of you. And so I'm sure it's time to recollect what happened. We almost resolved this issue in front of us today, but for the uncharitable interruption of General Howe. We probably would have resolved the issue, but we are now here in New York. But for those of you who were not there in Philadelphia, and those of you who were there and have forgotten the words, I would like to refresh your memories. I'd like to share those, the wisdom and the logic of Messrs. Franklin and Wilson. Dr. Franklin widely commented that he thought it an unusual condition to Confederation that should only be done by one colony on condition that it could spend another colony's money. He submitted that if we are to vote equally, then we should pay equally, and vice versa. But he doubted that the smaller states would be willing to purchase the privilege of equal voting at that price. He submitted that the danger of this confederation was more like Jonah swallowing the whale than the whale swallowing Jonah. Attorney Wilson dismissed in advance any useful analogy relating my experience with the Germanic government when proposed that their practice was going to result in failure, and it was wrong. And in a similar manner, he talked about the Belgian Confederacy. The Belgians believed that the provinces should be equal rather than by population. And we know that that's been the greatest imperfection of the Belgians. But let me quote Wilson's exact language. It is asked, shall 9 colonies put into the power of force to govern as they please? I invert the question and ask, shall 2 million of people put in the power of 1 million to govern as they please? It is pretended, too, that the smaller colonies will be endangered from the greater. Let's speak in honest language and say that the minority will be endangered from the majority. Is there an assembly on earth where the danger might not be equally pretended? The truth is that our proceeding will be consistent with the interests of the majority, and that's what it ought to be. The probability, in truth, is greater that the large states will not combine than they will combine. Gentlemen, I submit to the wisdom of Franklin and the logic of Wilson, and to the reason of all of you here today, that we settle this question based on the equality
came to proposed amendments to be voted on. One amendment proposed that they give special considerations to some smaller states, Rhode Island, Delaware, and Georgia, but to settle the question of voting largely on the basis of population. The amendment lost. Some states disagreed within their own delegates.
How does the delegation from North Carolina vote on the amendment? Mr. Penn? Aye. No. The vote is recorded as being divided.
The same result occurred when an amendment was proposed that would allow the number of delegates to Congress to be based on population, but which would retain voting rights on a state-by-state basis.
And finally, all other votes being cast, how does the delegation from North Carolina vote? Mr. Penn?
Aye. Mr. Harnett?
No! The vote is again recorded as being divided.
Well, then they tried an amendment which based the weight of each vote of the colony on the amount of money or taxes contributed to the central government. That too was soundly defeated.
All other states having cast their votes, how say the state of North Carolina, Mr. Penn?
No. Mr. Harnett?
No.
Well, finally, on October 7th, as a result of exhaustion, as much as anything else, a resolution was passed as originally proposed, which simply stated that in determining questions, each state should have one vote. Even the states with larger populations who had argued against the proposal voted for it. It was practically a unanimous vote, except.
And now, all the states so far having voted in favor of the resolution, we call on the voter of the delegates from the state of Virginia. Mr. Harrison? No. Mr. Francis Lighthorse Lee?
No.
The Virginia vote is recorded in the negative. And now the delegates from the state of North Carolina. Mr. Penn?
No. Mr. Harnett?
Aye.
Well, you know, that issue was a serious one, perhaps more so than it appeared to be. While it was temporarily resolved, the question of the power and influence of states or of individuals would be continued to be debated and compromised throughout our national history, right down to the present day. And the debates went on, article by article, section by section. Some provisions, after discussion and debate, were unanimously accepted.
Mr. Secretary, can you briefly report on those provisions which have unanimous?
Mr. President, I report as follows. Article 4, providing for that the free inhabitant of any state may enjoy those same privileges in any state. Article 5, providing for no less than 2 nor more than 7 delegates from any one state. Article 6, prohibiting any state from entering into any separate treaty with any foreign power. And finally, Article 11, providing for the admission of Canada into the Confederacy.
And other majority vote. In some respects, the changes from the original draft were minor. In other instances, the changes were fundamental.
And as to Article 2, I am not clear as to its language. It's my understanding that Article 2 was finally adopted by a divided vote. How shall I denote on my records, Mr. President?
Mr. President, if I may presume to answer the Secretary's question?
Yes, of course, the chair recognizes the new delegate from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. The provisions of Article 2 are so fundamentally important that I wish to read its language directly as adopted by this body so that there may be no mistake about it. Each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right which is not by this Confederation expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled. You will all recall that Mr. Dickinson's original draft of these articles, by implication and interpretation, provided for exactly the reverse. That is, there were no real restrictions on the Congress at all, at least very, very minimal. The Dickinson draft, in fact, called for a strong central government, the Congress being all powerful and the states being powerless. Mr. Secretary, Mr. President, make no mistake, this article clearly and specifically reverses that philosophy of our newly proposed government of confederation. It is the states which control the power, not the central government. It was the overwhelming consensus of the people and their delegates to this Congress that we don't want a strong central government. By our mutual declaration of independence, each colony decided that issue. We had a strong central government, King George. We got rid of him. We don't want him back in any form or guise. Mr. President, if there be any delegate present who doesn't understand this position and this language, let him now step forward.
Here, here.
Hearing no objections or further discussion, Mr. Johnson, you may so note your records.
While the debates concerning the Articles of Confederation were doubtlessly the most important matter on the agenda of the Congress, other matters of importance continue to interrupt their work and demand their attention. News, requests for action, and issues of every description daily press down on the time and energies of these patriots. Questions could deal with the chance of a military victory.
Mr. President.
Mr. William Deere, the delegate from New York.
Mr. President. Our armies are in constant retreat. All the news we hear is bad. Losses at Germantown and Branch Line. Losses, losses, losses. This is the time to replace our commander-in-chief.
Well, other issues involve chance of a very different kind.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gouverneur Morris, delegate from Pennsylvania.
what shall we do about the lottery? The public is entitled to know. They've purchased tickets and want to know who's won.
Mr. President,
The delegate from Connecticut, Mr. Richard Law.
it seems to me this is one of our lesser issues, gentlemen. As I understand the situation, the largest number of purchasers of lottery tickets reside in Philadelphia. Certainly we can't have a drawing in Philadelphia. If I understand our circumstances correctly, the reason we are here instead of there is because General Howe has just taken Philadelphia.
No, Mr. Law, I believe you'll find that Philadelphia has taken General Howe.
But not all military news was bad. On October 18th, a letter was received announcing the victory of General Gates over Burgoyne at Saratoga. On October 31st, Colonel Wilkinson, aide to General Gates, was admitted before the Congress with the official news of that victory.
Mr. Samuel Adams, if you please.
Yes, Mr. President.
I should like to appoint chair of the committee, together with Mr. Henry Lee and Mr. Daniel Otto of Pennsylvania. I'd like you to prepare a resolution to be sent to the several states marked December 18th next as a day for thanksgiving for the success lately obtained over the enemies of these United States, as well as our other medical investments.
I accept with great pleasure, Mr. President.
Mr. President, Mr. Carrollton of Maryland next.
Would it not be proper to strike a medal in honor of the delegates?
So ordered by acclamation.
And would it not be the same measure for Colonel Wilkinson, who just appeared with us, bringing news of this great victory? If the chair please. As president of Princeton, I was never in the habit of rewarding tardy students. I understand that the young colonel blames his delay in appearing before this body on the floor on the waters at Easter. But I also understand that it was in fact a liquid of an entirely different kind, encountered internally rather than externally, that caused his delay and permitted the message to arrive a week before the messenger. Oh, Mr. President, I do not think we should reward this young colonel by striking a medal in his honor. I would, however, be in favor of voting him a pair of spurs.
I take it, gentlemen, that we shall strike up one medal, and that medal will be in honor of General Gates alone.
And so the good news and the bad news and the late news interrupted their proceedings. The Congress was fully aware that their primary and most immediate task was to complete the common charter. Doggedly, they kept at that task with all its difficulties and nearly insoluble problems.
Gentlemen, we must return to the issue we commenced debating while in Philadelphia. We can no longer defer action, no matter how diverse our opinions might be. We must address the question of how we shall apportion the common expenses and how we shall require contributions to the common treasury. Mr. Chase, I believe you were the last to address this problem when we discussed it in Philadelphia. Do you wish to continue?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Dickinson's first draft of the provision proposed that the state should supply funds in proportionate to their total number of inhabitants, of every age, sex, and quality, except Indians. That was not acceptable. A subsequent proposal was that taxation should be based on the estimated value of property in every state. That latter has two defects. First, the value of property could never be estimated fairly from state to state. And second, Negroes are property, and as such cannot be distinguished from land or other personality. So, we return to the proposal to fix the tax by the number of inhabitants. However, it would be inequitable to place a tax on the head of a farmer in a southern state and also to place a tax on the head of a slave since the slave is property. And if you do that, you would have to place a tax on the head of the farmer in a northern state and also a tax on his head of cattle. Negroes should not be considered as members of the state any more than cattle. Thus, Mr. President, it would seem the equitable thing to do is to fix the tax according to the number of inhabitants in each state, but to exclude the Negroes from the count.
Mr. John Adams.
I submit, Mr. President, the number of people should be used as an index of the wealth of a state only, rather than as subjects of taxation. It makes no difference if you call your people freemen or slaves. 10 laborers, you call them freemen or slaves, and as such, wealth to the state. And it is a wealth of the state that should be taxed. If slaves overnight transformed into freemen, or freemen overnight transferred into slaves, in either event, there would still be the same number of laborers contributing to the wealth of the state. Consequently, it seems to me that both slave and freemen should be added to the population count.
Mr. Richard Henry Lee.
Mr. President, so that we may have a decision, let us vote on the motion that the public expense shall be apportioned according to the estimated value of the land and improvements in each state. In so moving, though, I must note that in this great business of forming our first common charter, we must yield a little to each other. And we cannot rigidly insist on having everything correspond to our own partial views. On such a basis, we would never, ever be able to confederate.
I second the motion.
Let the vote be taken, Mr. Secretary.
Massachusetts Bay, Mr. Adams.
Aye.
Connecticut, Mr. Law.
No.
New York, Mr. Doer.
Mr. James Swain and I disagree. Let the vote be recorded as divided.
New Jersey, Reverend Witherspoon.
Aye.
Pennsylvania, Mr. Morris.
Mr. Riverdue and I disagree. Count our vote as divided.
Maryland, Mr. Chase.
Aye.
Virginia, Mr. Richard Henry Lee.
Aye.
North Carolina, Mr. Penn. Aye. South Carolina, Mr. Lawrence.
Aye.
Wow.
And so, one of the thorniest questions to come before Congress was decided by the narrowest of margins. 5 in favor, 4 opposed, 2 states divided, 2 states absent. It wasn't a very comfortable majority. But the question, a crucial one, had been decided. And its determination, by whatever margin, opened the way for the final adoption of the articles so that the delegates could report success at last to their respective states.
Dear friend, the child Congress has been busy with these 2 years past is at last brought forth. I fear it will, by several legislatures, be thought a little deformed. You might think it a monster, but our affairs must be run without it. In this great business, each of us have had to yield a little, or we never could have had success. I submit, sir, that this has been the most difficult piece of business that was ever undertaken by any public body. But, at last, we have finished our charter. Your obedient servant.
And finished they had. The original charter, the Articles of Confederation, our first Constitution, with all its defects and novel problems, was finally molded into shape by the patience, industry, and genius of the patriotic band who met and worked in that early citadel of justice, the York County Courthouse in Yorktown, on November 15th, 1777.
I'd also like to thank the Bar Association because with their talent, they were able to bring history live. And I want to give an extra thanks to that parchment over here. Could you wave, please? Around all these got them all in one group so they could agree on our So thank you again very much. We appreciate you coming. We hope you'll continue to support our activities at the History Center.